smoke started rolling through the vents, like ash started rolling through the vents. And my buddy Phil and I were like very, very sketched out about the whole ordeal. A friend of mine, Phil Balmacetta, and I drove his C6 ZR1 to Alaska from Texas in June of last year. Which the funny part about that story is Phil and I weren't even really that good of friends when we started. We've talked on the internet a few times. We kind of both knew of each other, being in the same kind of communities, if you will. So he hit me with the idea. We saw that Alaska Speed Week was coming, and he hit me with the idea that, like, hey, I would like to go to this, but I need somebody crazy enough to go with me. Do you want to go? He told me later that he was like, I was hoping that you would say no, because that's a really long trip, especially in a Corvette, let alone a ZR1 Corvette. I, of course, said yes because I'm an idiot and crazy and would do anything to go see Alaska. I never once thought I would ever go, let alone in a Corvette. Anyways, we started getting closer and closer to the event. The registration date was coming up. If we could get a spot, we were going to go. And so registration day came, we got our spot, and it was go time, for lack of better terms. And it's a 2010 Corvette ZR1, which my buddy Phil, the guy that we drove with us, Phil Balmacetta, he had built a mini Corvette trailer. So it was a Corvette bed that he had gutted out and attached to a Harbor Freight trailer. And that's where we kept like our spare tools and spare parts and other miscellaneous things that we would need throughout the trip. And we also had the back of the car like filled to the brim with stuff and just a random like cheap Harbor Freight like hitch that you can make to attach to a Corvette. Otherwise, the car was practically stock, which we felt was probably a smart move because there was a conversation before we had left, like, hey, should we do like the stuff that we want to do to the car before we take it to Alaska? And we both were kind of like, we should probably leave it as stock as a rock as we can. So later we found out that we had destroyed the Magna Ride because hauling a trailer with all the stuff, driving that far, I think the entire trip was something like, well, because right after we had done race week, and I think it was a little over 10,000 miles put on a ZR1 in 4 weeks, which is a lot of people really wanted to burn us at the stake for. We love riling up the guys that really care about those cars a lot. I mean, for us, it's just a car. And in his words also, like he bought it to drive it. He takes it to probably 4 or 5 different drag and drive events a year. I think last year he put something like 20-something thousand miles on the car, racing it all across the country. Because he also ended up doing Death Week as well. And I'm in the same boat as him. Like I don't really care. If I had one that was even more rare, I would have drove it up there. The trip started fairly normal. We started in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He picked me up from my house. All the way through Kansas to Denver was really no problems. And then when we hit, I think it was Montana, we started to have like a rear wheel leak issue. So we drove the car up there on the stock Corvette wheels. So on the 20s with low profile tires, which we know now is not the way you should have done that. Alaska roads are terrible and potholy and very, very, very unforgiving to a sports car. I think it was right around Montana-ish, we started having a wheel leakage issue because we cracked a wheel somewhere along the road. So we just continued to put air in it and try and patch it up. And when we got into Canada, we like patched it with RTV one time. And then as we got further and further through the trip, it was getting worse and worse. And we ended up pulling the wheel off somewhere in British Columbia in a Tim Hortons parking lot. While driving through Canada, we accidentally drove through a wildfire. So we were driving, and like nothing felt wrong, nothing was wrong. And then all of a sudden it was really smoky and really dark all of a sudden. And it was about 5 degrees Celsius outside when were driving. And as we continued going down the highway, we're on the Alaskan highway at this point, it started to get really like more and more dark, more and more smoky. Smoke started rolling through the vents, like ash started rolling through the vents. And my buddy Phil and I were like very, very sketched out about the whole ordeal. And then all of a sudden it started getting really orange, really red. The exterior temperature of the car started like getting pretty hot. So like I said earlier, we were driving around like 5 degrees Celsius, and then it spiked up to like 12, 13 degrees Celsius. Then it got up to like considerably warmer than it was before. And we were dodging deer and raccoons and all sorts of random things that were diving out of the forest to also get away from the fire, and made it to our Airbnb at like 5:30 in the morning. The Airbnb we were staying at was somebody's just house, because there's no real hotels, there's no real like places to stay along the route that we took. And so we found Airbnbs and stuff along the way. Well, this was just a basement apartment in some old lady's house. And we scared the snot out of her because we were supposed to show up at like 9:30, 10, and showing up at 5 in the morning when the sun was coming up was very unnerving for her, I'm sure. And us also being idiots and not knowing anything about driving to Alaska, we didn't bring a sat phone, we didn't bring anything at all, really. And so we didn't have any way of contacting anybody, let alone our Airbnb host. So of course, when we show up to her house many hours after we were supposed to show up, it was very, very scary for her. So the drive was originally supposed to take right around 70 hours. I think it was like 69 and a half hours. And what we did not realize is you can't drive the speed limit in a car. So for a majority of the drive, like once we got on the actual Alaskan highway from Dawson Creek on for the most part, we averaged like 22 miles an hour. So a trip that should have taken 70 something hours ended up taking us a little over 120 hours to drive there. And the other funny part, again, with Phil and I both being idiots and not knowing anything about anything, we didn't have like any music saved on our phones or another phone jack to like go the other way. And again, like him and I weren't really friends when we started this journey. Like we were either going to be best friends after this or we were going to hate each other. And we ended up being really good friends, but we listened to the same probably 25 songs that were on his playlist from the early 2000s when he was in high school. And so we have the same, 23 songs memorized, like from beginning to end, and the playlist memorized as well. But the thing that we really didn't expect, so we were told that like the frost heaves were going to be really terrible to drive through with that kind of low of a car. What it really killed us was the bridge transitions, because Alaska, the way that the roads are made, like the earth underneath it moves so much that the bridge transitions are very abrupt and not forgiving for kind of car like that. So the bridge transitions were really terrible. Granted, since we were driving 20 miles an hour for the most part, we were able to somewhat maneuver around them. And my friend Phil, the guy that mostly drove us, and I say mostly because he did all but 6 hours of the driving. And not because he didn't trust me. The guy's just a freaking machine. And to be fair, it is mostly a two-person job to drive that kind of car through there because of the wildlife and the potholes that are as big as the dang car is. So it was very intimidating, but it's so freaking gorgeous out there that it's like hard to put into perspective for people that haven't done it. So, we would be pissed off because we were driving through potholes and dodging buffalo and bears and all sorts of crazy animals scurrying out of the bushes. And then you would round the corner to like the most beautiful scene that you've ever seen. And me being a photographer, like, hey, let's stop the car here, which probably added a few hours onto our 120-hour journey up there. But I would beg to say that it's well worth it. As soon as we got into Alaska, so we had dodged all the potholes. Like we hadn't hit a single pothole this entire trip. And again, driving 20 miles an hour helps, but we had gotten into Alaska and most of what we had driven through was dirt roads, and the dirt roads were actually better than the paved roads, believe it or not. And we transitioned into like a paved road that looked really, really nice. And we had rounded a corner, and just as soon as it came into sight, you couldn't dodge it. There was probably a 3 foot by 3 foot by, I don't know how deep, at least a foot deep pothole, and we smashed it with the passenger front tire, and we're like, and of course the rear tire and the trailer and everything else, because you can't really dodge it after that point. And we were like, that's the one that's gonna freaking stop this trip, because at that point we were out of tires, we were out of, like, all of our wheels were cracked. The front wheels are these, I don't remember the company that made them, but they're these billet special wheels that he had custom made for the car. And that was just like, it made him sick to like finally hit a pothole as soon as we got into Alaska. But that was really the only time where we thought that we had completely broken off the car. I mean, there was a few other times where like, ooh, that wasn't a good one. But that last pothole going right into Alaska was just, it was felt detrimental. And of course, the car was mostly fine. Like, we had beat up the side skirt a little bit, and we had bent the wheel and re-cracked the rear wheel, if I remember correctly. But that freaking Harbor Freight trailer is like invincible. Like, that Harbor Freight trailer is like, we drug that thing through hell and back, and it was just a champion. No problems, no nothing. It was just as tough as can be. So Alaska Speed Week was a drag and drive put on by the owners of Alaska Raceway Park. It was a 5-day event with 2 tracks, one track being it wasn't an abandoned runway, but a active runway. There's only really one actual road in Alaska, so we just did a big old giant loop around the area. Started and stopped in Palmer, Alaska at the drag strip there. The checkpoints there were really cool in comparison to other drag and drives that we do throughout the year because, I mean, 1, it's in Alaska, and 2, it's just they have so many random, weird, awesome places to go see. So to do this trip, we brought 2 spare rear wheels, and then we brought 1 spare front wheel. We drove on his drag setup front wheels, and then we had like regular road tire rear tires, so that way, you know, we weren't wearing out the drag radials because they're very expensive. And to be honest with you, they were a pain to get out of the trailer. So as little work as we could get done without pulling anything out of the trailer, we were going to do it. And so we ended up breaking three Corvette wheels on the way up there. So the 2 original ones that came with the car, and then 1 on the way back. Which actually, the Corvette breaking its wheels was kind of ended up being a really cool situation. So there's a guy in Alaska called the Swede. His name's John. He's from Sweden. He did a bunch of stuff at like the Stockholm Open and built a bunch of cars there. He's a chassis guy, I believe. And so when we were asking him, like, hey, who should we like have fix these wheels? And they're like, there's only one guy here that can weld anything, anywhere. So we talked to the guy, and he was like, yeah, just bring me a pack of PBR and we'll call it even. So he ended up having to weld 2 different wheels 2 different times. And so we paid him in 2 24 packs of PBR, which is, a very nice gentleman's exchange, I believe, for a tiny little bit of work. But that was a great time. That guy was freaking a nut. We went to the bar with him after, and with Christopher as well, and Bradley and David. And he had brought some guys that were friends with him, and we ended up talking about his whole life story and how he got there, and over a steak and a few beers. And that guy was a really, really awesome dude. So when we got to Alaska Speed Week, we weren't really sure what kind of cars were going to be there. I was told by the event organizer that there was going to be some pretty fast cars there. Well, I didn't realize that Alaska fast is not the rest of the world fast. I love my Alaska people, but they have some fast stuff there, but it's not near the caliber of stuff that we're normally around. And so we ended up getting first place in Alaska Speed Week. We won the stick shift class, but we were racing a guy named Fred in like a 67 Chevelle, and Fred is a G. So he like lap belt, old big block that he put together by himself, open face helmet, like was wearing like his normal like work jacket, and had never thought that his car was going to be low 11-second car, which we ended up helping him get it to towards the end of the week. But when we got there, we were like, oh, so there's like no real competition here. And so when Fred freaking clicked off, like I think it was like an 11:20 first pass, and we had competition, which we were so excited about, because there's almost nothing worse than getting to a race and having nobody to race. And so it was really cool for us to have somebody to kind of go back and forth with and race with. But yeah, we ended up winning. Fred had all sorts of troubles getting down the runway because it was absolutely zero prep at all. And he had only really been down like prep, and then of course like stoplight to stoplight racing that every old guy does in his 67 Chevelle. So, but yeah, the car did great the whole trip. We tried everything we could because we really wanted to run a 10 in Alaska. The car's been 1060s before, and we really wanted it to run a 10 down there. And honestly, like Alaska would be the place to do it because it looks like it's really high, but it's actually at sea level, which is really nice for a positive displacement blower car. But we couldn't do it. We got like 11.0 something and just couldn't squeak it into the 10s. So we were kind of disappointed about that, but obviously we were really excited to have won the very first Alaska Speed Week, and we were actually the second fastest car in the whole fleet, only to be edged out by a Hellcat, which, what can you do?
I start most of my days browsing Auto Tempest for my next bad decision of a car, but did you know that supporting Auto Tempest can also help support all the great content that they support in the automotive YouTube world? I know that you've probably enjoyed a lot of videos that they supported and a lot of channels that they've been sponsoring for years, perhaps without even knowing it. So check them out now at the link in the description below. It is the most powerful way to shop for your next car because you'll see all the listings showing up in one search, and you can search by any criteria that you want, but it also helps make automotive YouTube a much better place. So check them out now, autotempest.com, all the cars, one search.